If you're watching this, I hope you're listening too, especially you, my friend. 60 days ago, you walked away believing the jungle would erase me forever. You thought no one would ever hear my voice again. You believed the rain would wash away every footprint I left behind and every secret you were hiding. But you were wrong. I'm still alive, and today I'm finally ready to tell the truth. When the rescue team found me, I could barely stand. I had lost so much weight that the doctors stared at me in disbelief. They kept asking the same question. How did you survive 60 days out there? Some said it was impossible, others called it a miracle, but none of them knew the hardest part of my story. The jungle wasn't my greatest enemy. The person I trusted most was. I stayed silent for a long time because I couldn't believe what had happened. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear the endless rain, the cries of unseen animals in the darkness, and the sound of footsteps slowly walking away from me. Those footsteps belonged to someone I once called my best friend. Even now, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, wondering if any of it was real. Then I look at the scars on my hands, and I remember every single day I spent fighting to stay alive. People think survival is only about finding food or water. They're wrong. The real battle begins when hope starts disappearing, when your body is weak, when your heart is broken, and when you realize the person you would have risked your life for has already given up on yours. Before all of this happened, my life was simple. I was 24 years old. I loved traveling. I believed good people always stayed together when life became difficult. That belief would soon be shattered forever. Everything started with a trip that was supposed to be the happiest adventure of our lives. 5 friends, 1 small airplane, a beautiful rainforest stretching farther than we could see. We laughed, we took photos, we made promises that we would remember this trip for the rest of our lives. None of us knew we actually would, just not for the reasons we imagined. And before the sun disappeared that evening, everything would change forever. A week before the trip, none of us could stop talking about it. Our group chat was filled with jokes, packing lists, and countdown messages. We had been planning this adventure for almost a year. Life had pulled each of us in different directions after college, so we wanted one unforgettable journey before our busy lives completely took over. There were 5 of us: me, Ryan, Olivia, Daniel, and Ava. We weren't just friends. We were the kind of people who celebrated birthdays together, helped each other through heartbreaks, and believed nothing could ever come between us. At least that's what I thought. Ryan was the one who found the tour online. It promised breathtaking views of one of the world's largest rainforests, hidden waterfalls, and places that very few people had ever seen. It sounded like the adventure of a lifetime. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder if we should have canceled the trip the moment the weather forecast started getting worse. Maybe everything would have been different, but none of us wanted to waste something we had dreamed about for so long. The morning of the flight was beautiful. The sky was bright. The air felt fresh. Everyone was smiling. We stopped for coffee before heading to the small private airfield. Daniel kept making jokes. Olivia recorded videos for social media. Ava couldn't stop taking pictures of everything around us. I remember laughing so hard that my stomach hurt. Those simple moments are the ones I miss the most. Because none of us knew how quickly happiness could disappear. Our pilot greeted us with a friendly smile. He had flown this route many times before and assured us that the weather looked safe enough to continue. The airplane was small, but it felt comfortable. As we lifted off the ground, the city slowly disappeared beneath us. Soon there was nothing except endless green. The rainforest stretched to the horizon like an ocean made of trees. It was one of the most beautiful things I had ever seen. We pressed our faces against the windows like excited children. Everything felt perfect. About 40 minutes into the flight, the first sign of trouble appeared. The airplane shook, just once. No one seemed worried. The pilot remained calm. He told us it was only a little turbulence. We believed him. A few minutes later, the shaking became stronger. Dark clouds surrounded us from every direction. The bright sunlight disappeared. Rain began hitting the windows so hard that we could barely see outside. For the first time that day, the cabin became completely silent. I looked across at my friends. No one was smiling anymore. Then I noticed something I had never seen before. The pilot's confident face was gone. He was gripping the controls tightly. His eyes never left the windshield. That's when fear quietly entered the airplane. And none of us had any idea that within the next few minutes, our lives would be divided into two parts: the life we had before that flight, and everything that came after. The rain grew heavier with every passing second. It no longer sounded like rain. It sounded like thousands of tiny rocks crashing against the airplane. The cabin shook so violently that our backpacks slipped onto the floor. The cheerful music playing through someone's headphones had stopped. No one spoke anymore. We were all looking at the pilot, waiting for him to tell us everything would be okay. Instead, he took a deep breath and spoke into the radio. His voice was calm, but his eyes were filled with worry. I couldn't understand what the people on the other end were saying, but I heard one sentence that made my heart sink. "Looking for a safe place to land." Ryan tried to smile. "We'll laugh about this later," he said. No one answered. Another violent jolt threw the airplane sideways. Olivia grabbed my hand so tightly that my fingers went numb. Daniel whispered, "Please, let this end." Outside the windows, the rainforest had disappeared behind thick gray clouds. We couldn't see the ground anymore, only darkness, only rain. Then, the engine made a strange sound. It wasn't loud, it was worse. It suddenly became quiet. A silence that didn't belong in the sky. The pilot pushed a few switches. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. For the first time, he turned toward us. "I need everyone to stay calm." Those were the last calm words we heard. A warning alarm suddenly filled the cabin. Its sharp sound echoed inside my head. The airplane began losing height. Fast. Much faster than before. Someone started crying. Someone else began praying. I couldn't move. I couldn't even think. I just stared out of the window as enormous trees appeared beneath us. They were getting closer. Too quickly. The pilot pulled back on the controls with all his strength. Branches flashed past the wings. A loud crack echoed through the cabin. The airplane spun. Everything around me became a blur. Backpacks, broken glass, screams, rain, then darkness. When I opened my eyes, everything was silent. No engine, no voices, only the sound of water dripping from the leaves above me. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then the pain hit. Every part of my body hurt. My head was pounding. My left arm was covered in scratches. I slowly pushed myself up from the wet ground. The smell of mud and broken trees filled the air. The airplane was nowhere to be seen. Only scattered pieces of metal lay between the trees. "Ryan?" I called. No answer. "Olivia?" Nothing. "Daniel!" Only birds flew away from the branches. I shouted every name again and again until my voice became weak. The jungle answered with silence. I was completely alone. Or, at least, that's what I believed. Because somewhere deep inside that endless rainforest, someone had already survived. And before this nightmare was over, one of us would make a choice that I could never forgive. I didn't know how much time had passed after the crash. Minutes or hours. The thick trees blocked the sun so completely that it was impossible to tell. I forced myself to stand, even though every step sent pain through my body. If I stayed where I was, no one would ever find me. "Ryan!" I shouted again. "Olivia, Daniel, Ava!" Only the sound of insects answered. The silence was almost worse than the crash itself. I took a slow breath and remembered something I had heard in a survival documentary years earlier. Don't panic. Panic makes every bad decision feel like the right one. So I gave myself one simple goal: find water, then find shelter, then keep moving. Not because I was brave, because I refused to disappear. As I searched through the wreckage scattered across the forest floor, I found a small backpack hanging from a broken branch. Inside was a half-full bottle of water, a flashlight with weak batteries, a lighter, and 2 protein bars that had somehow survived the crash. To someone in a city, it looked like almost nothing. To me, it felt like hope. I took only a few small sips of water. Every drop mattered now. The rain started again before sunset. Within minutes, I was completely soaked. The jungle changed after dark. The peaceful forest became a place filled with strange sounds. Leaves moved without warning. Something large splashed in the distance. Insects buzzed around my face. Every shadow looked alive. I climbed beneath the tangled roots of a huge fallen tree and pulled branches in front of the opening to block the wind. It wasn't a real shelter, but it was enough to survive one night. Sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, another unfamiliar sound pulled me awake. I kept thinking about my friends. Were they searching for me too? Or was I truly the only one left? The next morning, hunger became my new enemy. I finished half of one protein bar and forced myself to save the rest. If rescue came tomorrow, I would laugh about rationing food. If it didn't, I would need every bite. For the next several days, I followed a narrow stream through the jungle. Clean running water meant life. I drank carefully, collected rainwater whenever I could, and searched for fruit I recognized from survival guides. Some berries looked inviting. I ignored them. One mistake could end everything. By the 5th day, my clothes were torn. My shoes were falling apart. Small cuts covered my hands and legs. Mosquitoes never stopped biting. Still, I kept walking. Every morning I told myself the same words. Just make it until tonight. Not until next week, not until rescue, just until tonight. On the 7th day, I climbed onto a large rock hoping to see something. Smoke, a river, anything. Instead, I saw footprints in the wet mud below. Fresh footprints. They were too clear to be mine. Someone else had survived the crash. Relief rushed through my body so fast that I almost cried. I wasn't alone after all. Without thinking, I followed the trail deep into the jungle. I had no idea that those footprints would lead me to the one person I trusted most, and the one person who would change my life forever. I almost ran through the trees. For the first time since the crash, I wasn't thinking about hunger or pain. I was thinking about hope. The footprints became clearer as I followed them through the wet ground. Broken branches and fresh marks on the trees told me someone had passed this way only a short time earlier. "Hello!" I shouted. My voice echoed through the forest. For a few seconds, nothing. Then I heard it, a weak voice. "Emma?" I froze. I knew that voice. "Ryan!" I pushed through the thick bushes as fast as I could. There he was, sitting against a large tree, covered in dirt and scratches. The moment he saw me, tears filled his eyes. "I thought you were gone," he whispered. I couldn't stop smiling. Without thinking, I hugged him. For the first time in days, I felt safe. We weren't alone anymore. That evening, we shared the little food we had left. Ryan had found a small emergency bag from the wreckage. Inside were a knife, a metal cup, a rope, and a few packets of dried food. It wasn't much, but together, it felt like enough. We promised each other one thing. No matter what happens, we stay together. At the time, I believed every word. Over the next few days, we built a better shelter near the stream. Ryan collected firewood while I searched for edible plants and rainwater. At night, we talked about our families, about home, about how amazing it would feel to sleep in a real bed again. Whenever I started losing hope, Ryan reminded me to keep going. Whenever he looked exhausted, I encouraged him. For a little while, it felt like we might actually survive. But the jungle has a way of changing people. Days turned into weeks. The food became harder to find. The rain never seemed to stop. Every meal was smaller than the last. Every morning, we woke up weaker. Then, little things started changing. Ryan became quieter. If I found fruit, he counted every piece. If I collected rainwater, he asked how much I had saved. He wasn't the same person anymore. At first, I blamed the stress. Anyone would change after weeks trapped in a place like this, so I ignored the warning signs. One afternoon, I returned from the stream carrying fresh water. Ryan quickly zipped up the emergency bag. He smiled, too quickly. "What are you hiding?" I asked, laughing. "Nothing," he replied, but his eyes avoided mine. That night, while he slept, I noticed something beside his backpack. 2 unopened food packets. He had been saving them. Without telling me. I wanted to confront him. Instead, I stayed quiet. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he was just trying to survive. I kept making excuses for him because I couldn't imagine my best friend choosing himself over us. I still believed we would leave that jungle together. I had no idea that Ryan had already made a different plan, and by the time I discovered the truth, it would almost cost me my life. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The fire had almost gone out, and the jungle was covered in a thick layer of mist. Everything was quiet, except for the sound of the stream flowing nearby. Ryan wasn't beside the fire. I thought he had gone to collect wood. That wasn't unusual. I added a few dry sticks to the fire and waited. 10 minutes passed, then 30, an hour, still nothing. A strange feeling settled in my chest. I picked up the metal cup and walked toward the stream, calling his name. "Ryan." No answer. I searched the places we usually visited, the fruit trees, the fishing spot, the broken airplane wing we used as a landmark. Nothing. When I returned to our shelter, my heart almost stopped. Ryan's backpack was gone, the emergency knife was gone, the rope was gone, the lighter was gone. Even the last packets of dried food had disappeared. Only my empty backpack remained on the ground. For a few seconds, I refused to believe it. "There has to be another reason," I whispered to myself. Maybe he had gone looking for help. Maybe he planned to come back. Then I noticed something near the edge of the shelter, fresh footprints, only one set, leading away from our camp, not toward it. I followed them as far as I could. After nearly an hour, I finally saw him. Ryan was standing on a rocky hill, adjusting his backpack. "Ryan!" I shouted with everything I had left. He turned around. For a moment, our eyes met. I expected him to smile, to wave, to tell me to hurry. Instead, he just stood there. Then he slowly looked away. Without saying a single word, he continued walking. I screamed his name again, and again. He never looked back. I stood there, unable to move. The jungle suddenly felt colder than ever before. I wasn't crying because he had taken the food. I wasn't crying because he had taken the knife. I was crying because, in that single moment, I realized something far more painful. The person I trusted most had decided my life was worth less than his chance to survive. That truth hurt more than hunger ever could. When I finally walked back to the empty shelter, I didn't know what to do. For the first time since the crash, I wasn't afraid of the jungle. I was afraid of giving up. I sat beside the dying fire until sunset, staring at the place where Ryan used to sleep. Then I remembered the words I had repeated to myself since the first week. "Just make it until tonight." This time I changed them. "I'll make it, even if I have to do it alone." I didn't know it yet, but that decision would become the turning point of my entire life. Because the next morning, something unexpected would happen. Something that would give me a reason to believe that the jungle hadn't finished writing my story. The next morning I woke up with swollen eyes and an empty stomach. For a few moments I forgot everything. Then I looked around. The shelter was silent. Ryan was gone. The supplies were gone. And I was truly alone. I could have stayed there and waited for everything to end. Honestly, part of me wanted to, but another part of me refused. If the jungle wanted to test me, I wasn't going to quit. I stood up, took a deep breath, and made myself one promise. If I survive this, it will be because I never stopped trying. The first thing I needed was fire. Without a lighter, every night would become more dangerous. I remembered watching survival videos years ago. They showed how dry bark and thin branches could catch a spark from friction. It sounded impossible, but impossible was all I had left. For hours I rubbed dry sticks together until my hands were covered with blisters. Again and again. Nothing. I almost gave up. Then, a tiny thread of smoke rose from the dry bark. I froze. I blew on it as gently as I could. A small orange glow appeared. Seconds later, a tiny flame came to life. I laughed. Then I cried. It was only a little fire, but to me it felt like proof that I still had a chance. That night, for the first time since Ryan left, I wasn't afraid of the darkness. The fire reminded me that hope could start with something as small as a single spark. The following days became a routine. Wake up before sunrise, collect rainwater, search for fruit, follow the stream for fish, repair my shelter, repeat. Life became simple. Survive today. Think about tomorrow later. Slowly, I became stronger. I learned which trees gave clean rainwater, which plants to avoid, where fish gathered in the shallow parts of the stream. Every small success felt like a victory. Then, one afternoon, while following the stream farther than ever before, I noticed something unusual. A tree had been marked with a bright strip of orange fabric. It didn't belong there. It wasn't part of nature. Someone had tied it around the trunk. I looked around carefully. About 50 yards ahead, there was another one, then another. Someone had left a trail. My heart started racing. Was it another survivor? A rescue team? Or had Ryan passed this way? I didn't know. But for the first time in weeks, I wasn't following blind hope. I was following a real sign. I tightened the straps on my backpack and stepped toward the next marker. Whatever waited at the end of that trail, I knew my life was about to change again. I followed the orange markers for nearly 2 hours. They weren't random. Each one was tied carefully to a tree, just far enough apart that you could always see the next one. Whoever made this trail knew exactly what they were doing. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't wandering. I had a direction. As the afternoon faded, the forest slowly began to change. The ground became higher. The air felt cooler. Then I heard something I hadn't heard since the crash, the sound of rushing water. I pushed through a wall of vines and stopped. In front of me was a beautiful waterfall pouring into a clear pool. For a few seconds, I simply stood there. It looked almost unreal. After weeks of muddy streams and endless rain, the clean water felt like a gift. I filled every container I had and washed the dirt from my face. For the first time in a long while, I almost felt human again. Then I noticed something on the other side of the waterfall. A small cave. It wasn't very deep, but it was dry. More importantly, someone had been there before me. There were old ashes from a fire, a few empty food wrappers, and footprints, fresh enough that they couldn't have been there for very long. My heart started pounding. "Hello?" I called. No answer. I searched the cave carefully. Near the back, hidden beneath a flat stone, I found a small waterproof notebook. Its pages were damp, but I could still read most of the writing. The first few pages listed dates and simple survival notes. Found clean water. Stayed here during heavy rain. Need to keep moving. Then I turned another page. My hands began to shake. A sentence had been written in large letters. "If someone finds this, don't follow the man with the blue backpack. He lies to survive." I stared at those words. Ryan's backpack was blue. I turned another page. The handwriting became messy, as if the writer had been weak. He said he was going to bring help. He took the food. He never came back. My breathing became heavy. It wasn't just me. Someone else had trusted him. Someone else had been left behind. I closed the notebook and sat in complete silence. For days I had blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't strong enough. Maybe I had slowed him down. Maybe I had imagined his betrayal. But now I knew the truth. Ryan hadn't made one desperate mistake. He had made a choice to save himself, no matter who he had to leave behind. As the sun began to set, I slipped the notebook into my backpack. If I ever made it home, people deserved to know the truth. Just then, a distant sound echoed through the valley. At first, I thought it was thunder. Then I heard it again, a deep, steady rhythm. I looked up toward the sky. My heart nearly stopped. It sounded like helicopter blades. I grabbed a burning branch from my fire and ran into the open, praying that this time someone was finally looking for me. I ran as fast as my exhausted legs could carry me. The sound grew louder. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't the wind. It was a helicopter. For weeks, I had dreamed about hearing that sound. Now it was real. I reached the open rocks beside the waterfall and waved the burning branch above my head. "Please!" I screamed until my throat burned. "I'm here!" The helicopter passed over the trees. For one terrifying moment, it kept flying. My heart sank. I thought they hadn't seen me. Then the aircraft suddenly slowed. It circled once, then again. I dropped to my knees. "They saw me," I whispered through tears. "They actually saw me." The helicopter hovered above the clearing as two rescue workers leaned out, searching the ground. One of them pointed directly at me. A few minutes later, another rescue team reached me from the forest below. They called my name gently, afraid I might panic. "It's okay," one of them said. "You're safe now." Safe. I hadn't heard that word in 60 days. The moment they reached me, my body finally gave up. The strength that had kept me alive disappeared all at once. I collapsed into their arms. When I opened my eyes again, I was inside the helicopter. A blanket covered my shoulders. Someone placed a bottle of water in my hands. "Take small sips," a medic said softly. "We've got you." I looked out of the window. The endless jungle stretched beneath us. For 60 days it had been my prison. Now, for the first time, I was leaving it behind. Hours later, I woke up in a hospital. Bright lights filled the room. Machines beeped quietly beside my bed. A doctor smiled as he noticed I was awake. "You gave us quite a scare," he said. He explained that I was severely dehydrated, exhausted, and dangerously underweight. Then he shook his head in amazement. "We honestly didn't think anyone could survive out there for 60 days. News of my rescue spread quickly. Reporters gathered outside the hospital. People called it a miracle, but they only knew half the story. A police officer visited me the following afternoon. He asked gentle questions about the crash. Then he mentioned something that made my heart stop. "One of your friends was rescued weeks ago. Ryan. He told us he searched for you," the officer continued. "He said he believed you had already disappeared." I closed my eyes. The images came rushing back. Ryan standing on the hill, our eyes meeting, his back turning toward me, his footsteps fading into the jungle. He hadn't lost me. He had left me. I slowly reached into the small bag the rescue team had brought from the cave. Inside was the waterproof notebook. I looked at the officer. "I think you need to read this." The room fell completely silent, because the truth everyone believed was about to change forever. The police officer opened the notebook carefully. The pages were worn and stained from weeks in the jungle, but the writing was still clear enough to read. He turned each page slowly. The room became completely silent. When he reached the warning about the man with the blue backpack, he stopped. Then he looked at me. "Are you saying this is Ryan?" I nodded. I wish I wasn't. The officer didn't ask another question. He closed the notebook, thanked me, and quietly left the room. For the next few days, doctors focused on helping me recover. I learned how to walk without losing my balance again. I slowly ate real food. Every small step felt like another victory. But outside my hospital room, something much bigger was happening. Investigators returned to the crash site. They searched the area where Ryan claimed he had spent his final days before being rescued. What they found didn't match his story. Several days later, 2 detectives came back to see me. One of them placed a small evidence bag on the table. Inside was the emergency knife, the same knife Ryan had taken from our shelter. There was also the metal cup with my initials scratched into the bottom. I recognized it immediately. The detective spoke calmly. "Ryan told us he found these items abandoned." He paused. "But where we found them tells a very different story." According to their investigation, Ryan had reached an old ranger trail less than a week after leaving me, instead of telling rescuers exactly where he had last seen me. He gave only a vague description of the area. Search teams looked in the wrong place for days. By the time they expanded the search, heavy rain had erased nearly every sign I had left behind. The detective looked at me with quiet sadness. If he had shared the correct location from the beginning— He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I already knew. Everything became painfully clear. Ryan hadn't pushed me into danger. He hadn't attacked me. His betrayal was something much quieter. He chose himself. He convinced himself that saving one person was easier than risking two, and once he reached safety, he buried the truth beneath fear and guilt. A week later, Ryan asked if he could see me. I thought about it for a long time. Then I agreed. When he walked into my hospital room, he looked nothing like the confident friend I once knew. His shoulders were low. His eyes never met mine. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry." I looked at him, not with anger, not anymore, just with sadness. "You didn't leave me behind because of the jungle," I said quietly. "You left me behind because you stopped believing my life mattered as much as yours." Tears filled his eyes. He tried to explain. He said he was scared. He said he thought he would die. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe he wasn't. But there was one thing neither of us could ever change. When I called his name that morning, he heard me, and he kept walking. Some mistakes can be forgiven. Others stay with you forever. I didn't hate Ryan, but I could never trust him again. And that was a consequence he would have to live with for the rest of his life. Little did I know, the hardest part of my journey wasn't surviving the jungle. It was learning how to live after it. People often ask me what the hardest part of those 60 days was. They expect me to talk about hunger, the endless rain, the sleepless nights, or the fear of never being rescued. Those things were difficult, but they weren't the hardest part. The hardest part was coming home. When I finally left the hospital, everything looked the same. The streets were busy. People laughed in cafes. Children played in parks. Life had moved forward. But inside me, time was still trapped in that jungle. For weeks, I couldn't sleep through the night. A sudden clap of thunder made my heart race. The sound of heavy rain pulled me back to that tiny shelter beneath the trees. Sometimes I would wake up believing I was still there. Then I would see the ceiling above my bed and remind myself that I had survived. My family never left my side. My mother hugged me every morning as if she was afraid I would disappear again. My father rarely spoke about what had happened. Instead, he simply sat beside me. Sometimes silence says more than words ever can. Little by little, I started rebuilding my life. I began walking every morning. At first, only a few minutes. Then a little farther each day. Every step reminded me how lucky I was to still be alive. One afternoon, I opened the backpack the rescue team had returned to me. Inside were the same worn clothes, the empty water bottle, and the small waterproof notebook. I held it in my hands for a long time. Then I made a decision. I wasn't going to hide my story. If surviving those 60 days meant anything, it should give hope to someone else. Months later, I accepted an invitation to speak at a survival awareness event. Standing on that stage felt more frightening than facing the jungle. Hundreds of people were watching me. They didn't want to hear about miracles. They wanted to know how I kept going when everything seemed lost. I smiled and answered with complete honesty. I stopped thinking about surviving 60 days. The audience became silent. I only tried to survive one day at a time. Sometimes, just one more sunrise, just one more night, just one more step. That's how impossible journeys become possible. After the event, a young woman walked up to me with tears in her eyes. She thanked me for sharing my story. She said she had been ready to give up on her own life because of problems back home. "But after hearing you," she whispered, "I think I can keep going." At that moment, I realized something. Maybe I hadn't survived only for myself. Maybe I had survived so that someone else would find hope when they needed it most. Looking back now, I don't remember only the pain. I also remember the tiny victories. The first fire I made with my own hands, the first clean drink of rainwater, the first sunrise after I thought I wouldn't live to see another morning. Those moments taught me something no classroom ever could. Hope doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes, it begins as a tiny spark, and if you protect it day after day, it can become strong enough to light your way out of even the darkest jungle. But before I end my story, there's one final lesson I want to leave with you. If you've listened to my story this far, thank you. Not because I wanted people to feel sorry for me, but because every minute you spent listening means the truth didn't disappear in that jungle. People still ask me one question more than any other. Do you hate Ryan? For a long time, I thought I did. I replayed that morning over and over in my mind. I remembered calling his name. I remembered him turning around. I remembered him walking away. Those memories will never leave me. But carrying hate is like carrying a heavy backpack through a rainforest. The longer you hold it, the weaker you become. So I made a choice. I forgave him. Not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Forgiveness didn't erase what happened. It didn't rebuild the friendship we once had, and it didn't change the truth. Some people will stand beside you only while life is easy. The moment fear takes over, they reveal who they really are. That was the greatest lesson the jungle taught me. It wasn't about surviving without food. It wasn't about making fire. It wasn't even about escaping the wilderness. It was about learning the difference between the people who promise to stay and the people who actually do. Today I still love traveling. I still stop whenever I hear birds singing after the rain. And every sunrise reminds me that life is a gift none of us should take for granted. Sometimes I look at the small scar on my hand and smile. Not because I'm happy about what happened, but because it's proof that I refuse to give up. If you're going through your own dark season right now, maybe your jungle isn't filled with trees. Maybe it's loneliness, failure, loss, fear, or betrayal. Whatever it is, please don't stop walking. You don't have to conquer the whole journey today. Just take one more step, then another. One day you'll look back and realize those small steps saved your life. As for my friend, I truly hope you're hearing these words. You believed the jungle would become my final chapter. Instead, it became the place where I discovered who I really was. My name is Emma. I survived 60 days in one of the world's deadliest jungles. Not because I was the strongest, not because I was the luckiest. I survived because even after I was abandoned, I never abandoned myself. And if my story teaches you just one thing, let it be this. As long as hope is still alive, your story is not over.